Welcome to the MacArthur Memorial podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Williams. Join me as we explore the life and legacy of General of the Army Douglas MacArthur and discuss a wide range of military history topics, from the American Civil War to the Korean War. On October 26, 2024, the MacArthur Memorial and the Hampton Roads Naval Museum commemorated the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Leyte Gulf with a series of presentations. Dr. Peter Mansour, a retired Army colonel and current chair of military history at Ohio State University, presented a lecture entitled The Land Battle on Leyte. The following is the podcast version of his talk. If you would like to see the pictures and other slides he used, you can also find the presentation on the MacArthur Memorial's YouTube channel. There is a link to that version of the presentation in today's episode description.
Well, thank you for having me here today. And being in the home of all things MacArthur, I think I should begin my presentation with a hearty beat Navy. Or maybe beat the Japanese Navy. MacArthur had a desire to return and liberate the Philippines from the moment he left. The entire campaign in New Guinea and in the Southwest Pacific was predicated on getting back there. But that liberation was always going to begin with the island of Mindanao, the southernmost major island in the Philippine archipelago. But that changed in September 1944 when Bull Halsey took his Third Fleet and conducted a series of carrier strikes on the central and southern Philippine islands, the Visayan Islands, or the central Philippines, and then Mindanao, in which he neutralized Japanese air power in the area. One of his pilots was shot down on Leyte. He was saved by the guerrilla movement there and returned to his ship. And he reported that he didn't see any Japanese on Leyte. So Halsey sends a dramatic proposal to his boss, Nimitz, in Hawaii, who forwards it to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that the Allies should bypass Mindanao and start with the invasion of Leyte in the central Philippine Islands. Now, MacArthur was on his way to Morotai, the invasion there, under radio listening silence, and so he didn't receive the message from the Joint Chiefs saying, hey, General MacArthur, what do you think? In fact, that message went to his Chief of Staff, Sutherland, in Hollandia, his forward base on New Guinea. And Sutherland and MacArthur thought as one. It's one of the reasons why MacArthur picked him to be his Chief of Staff, and they were paired at the hip until personal issues separated them near the end of the war. But Sutherland thought he knew, or knew he knew, what MacArthur would reply. So he drafted a reply, and he said, the Cliff Notes version is, we're all in. We agree, we'll go to Leyte first. And he signed the message, not Sutherland, he signed it MacArthur. MacArthur got back from Morotai, was told what had happened, and he goes, yep, good decision, don't ever do that again. Now that message went to the Joint Chiefs, who were not in Washington, D.C. They were in Quebec for one of the many Allied conferences during the war, and they were at a dinner with their British counterparts, and they excused themselves, and in just 90 minutes of discussion, recast the entire strategy for the Pacific War. They decided that indeed MacArthur would invade Leyte on October 20th. They canceled the invasion of Yap, which made 24th Corps available for other duties, and they allocated that formation to MacArthur for the Leyte invasion. So the plan was set. The Japanese were also preparing. They understood that the loss of the Philippines would result in the severing of the empire's logistical lifeline to the resource-rich Dutch East Indies, and with it, Japan's existence as an industrial nation, because Japan received its oil and fuel to fuel its military forces and its industry from the Dutch East Indies, modern-day Indonesia. According to Vice Admiral Tatsuku Nakazawa, the chief of the operations section of the Imperial General Headquarters, after the fall of Saipan, which fell in June and July 1944, the Philippines were the last line of national defense. As soon as the Marianas were lost, Japanese military leaders began to reinforce their forces in the Philippines, shifting air and ground divisions from Manchuria, Formosa, and Southeast Asia to the archipelago. And as Tom noted, the plan for the defense of the Philippines was codenamed Show 1. Halsey followed up his very successful attacks on the Philippines by going north and striking at Japanese airfields on Formosa. And for 3 days, October 12th through the 14th, he pounded the Japanese bases there, destroying hundreds of aircraft. The Japanese Imperial General Headquarters made the mistake of taking the air groups that were training on their carriers in the inland sea to repopulate them with naval aircraft after the Battle of the Philippine Sea, and putting them into the fight down at Formosa, even though the pilots were not very well trained at that point. And as a result, the Japanese aviators attack with great bravery and die in greater numbers, and they send misleading reports back to base, leading their commanders to conclude that the U.S. Pacific Fleet had suffered severe losses in this battle. Now, damage to the Third Fleet amounted to torpedo hits to two cruisers, the Canberra and the Houston, both of which remained afloat and were towed back to Ulithi Atoll for repair. The Japanese government, though, erroneously claimed and actually believed that its airmen had sunk or heavily damaged 57 warships, including 19 of the Pacific Fleet's carriers, to which Admiral Halsey responded in a wryly humorous message to Nimitz. The Third Fleet's sunken and damaged ships have been salvaged and are retiring at high speed toward the enemy. But the Japanese believed that the Battle off Formosa had evened the odds for the upcoming battle for the Philippines. And this explains a lot in both the air or the naval and the ground side of the equation in the upcoming battle for Leyte Gulf. In the weeks leading up to the American invasion, the Japanese forces underwent a change of command from Lieutenant General Shigenori Kuroda to General Tomoyuki Yamashita. Yamashita was the conqueror of Malaya. He had taken Singapore from the British in the greatest defeat in Commonwealth military history. He was one of the most skilled tacticians in the Japanese army. He possessed a brilliant military mind. And because of all these factors, he was a political danger to Prime Minister Hideki Tojo. And after the fall of Singapore, Yamashita was basically sidelined. He was given a training command up on the border with Russia and Manchuria. And he held that post for more than 2 years while more important actions were being fought elsewhere. But after the loss of the Marianas Islands in the summer of '44, Tojo was ousted from power and Yamashita was resurrected. He took command in the Philippines on October 9th, only 11 days before the American invasion. Of course, he didn't know it was coming. He was plagued by inadequate resources and an inexperienced staff unfamiliar with the Philippines. And this is best exemplified by a remark that was recorded by the official U.S. Army historian, that the state of affairs was well exemplified by the remark of Yamashita's new chief of staff, Lieutenant General Akira Muto, who arrived in the Philippines on the day of the invasion of Leyte, October 20th, from Sumatra, where he had been in command of the 2nd Imperial Guards Division. Told of the landings on Leyte that morning, Muto is reported to have replied, very interesting, but where is Leyte? Upon assuming command, General Yamashita had issued orders to delay the Americans in the Visayas and Mindanao and to fight the decisive battle with the Americans on Luzon, the largest and most important island in the Philippines. Field Marshal Count Hisaichi Taruchi, commander of the Southern Expeditionary Army Group based in Saigon, but for the moment he's in Manila, believed that if U.S. forces were able to construct air bases on Leyte, the 14th Area Army would not be able to successfully defend Luzon. He also falls for the trap that the Battle of Formosa had evened the odds in the Philippines. And so instead of fighting the decisive battle on Luzon, he orders his forces to fight the decisive battle on Leyte. Lieutenant General Saizi Arusi, the chief of the 2nd Department of the Japanese General Staff, remarked that General Yamashita was a bit skeptical at first, which is more than an understatement. I've seen many primary source documents where Yamashita fights tooth and nail with his boss, trying to get him to agree to fight the decisive battle on Luzon. But in the end, Terauchi holds firm, and Yamashita followed his orders to fight the decisive battle for the Philippines on Leyte, which set up a showdown with the 6th U.S. Army under the command of Major General Walter Kruger on the island. And the Japanese Navy was alerted to sail to the Philippines to fight a decisive battle with the Pacific Fleet, which we've heard about. The Leyte was defended by the 16th Division. This was the same Japanese unit that had conquered Bataan. And there were about 22,000 men on Leyte on October 20th, 22,000 Japanese defenders, which would have been a fairly easy operation for 6th Army had it remained that way. Only a light screen of defenders covered the beaches. By this point in the war, the Japanese realized that American firepower will destroy anything that's guarding the beaches, and so they're planning to defend along 3 lines of fortifications built further inland. A-Day, it's not D-Day in the Pacific. They changed the letters up to not to have it mirror D-Day in Normandy, but A-Day for Leyte dawned. It was one of the nicest days of the year. It was like probably the last nice day of 1944 in Leyte at any rate. It dawned, according to one observer, with that quiet beauty which marks the tropics at their best. The sky was clear and bright, the sea calm and blue. And the sea, according to the soldiers, was almost like glass as they moved in on their landing craft. The typhoon season, however, was bearing down on Leyte, and the weather would soon change. Beginning at 0700 hours, the ships of the 7th Fleet pounded the invasion beaches with neutralization fire, while aircraft from the escort fighters hit targets further inland. Battleships pummeled the shore for 2 hours, followed by 45 minutes of fire from cruisers and then 15 minutes of fire from destroyers. And the final salvos came from rocket and mortar-firing landing craft, which, in the words of MacArthur's naval attaché, the U.S. Naval Captain Raymond Tarbuck, senior naval advisor, those landing craft launched thousands of rockets that hit the beach with the rumble of an earthquake. It is impossible to distinguish one explosion from another. It is just a roar. The 4 assault divisions stormed ashore at 1000 hours. The 1st Cavalry Division in the north landed on White Beach, closest to the city of Tacloban, with the 24th Infantry Division landing on Red Beach, the 96th Infantry Division landing on Orange and Blue Beaches, and the 7th Infantry Division landing on Violet and Yellow Beaches to its south. The landings, in most cases, were only lightly contested. The largest impediment was the terrain. There were some impenetrable swamps behind some of these beaches, which enveloped some men in mud up to their armpits. Now, famously, MacArthur went ashore 3 hours later at about 1300. His impromptu waiting ashore with Philippine President Sergio Osmeña and their party was captured in what is now an iconic photo. There's a story behind the photo. I'll give you the short version, but MacArthur actually had nice press trousers and was planning to give that speech, I have returned, in a nice uniform. But the beachmaster denied them the opportunity to land on what was the only operational jetty in the area, and there were no landing craft small enough that he could transfer to get him all the way to the beach. And so basically the beach master said, let him walk. And his boat grounded on a sandbar offshore, and he had to wade through the surf to get to the shore. Now that look on his face, it's an iconic look. Determination, destiny. It's actually anger. He's pissed off at the beach master for making him wade through the shore. But once he sees this photo, he realizes, this is my karma. I mean, this is now who I am. So he embraces it. And very few know the true story. You do now. After an hour of exploring the beach under occasional sniper fire, MacArthur broadcast that speech which you heard at the introduction. The Japanese Navy sortied from its anchorages in Brunei and the Inland Sea to fight what would become to be called the Battle of Leyte Gulf. MacArthur was aboard the cruiser Nashville. It was his headquarters before his headquarters was established ashore. And the captain's like, sir, I need to take my ship down to Surigao Strait to fight the battle there. I need you to move over to the Wasatch, which was a command ship. And MacArthur's like, no, I'm fine here. When do we start? He wanted to be part of the naval battle. And Kincaid instead ordered the Nashville to remain at anchor in Leyte Gulf, not to endanger MacArthur in a sea battle. The 35th Army, the Japanese 35th Army on Cebu, chose to believe that the full force of the American invasion force had been lost in an unsuccessful attempt to invade Formosa. And what they were seeing now were stragglers from a great tropical storm which were straggling ashore in Leyte Gulf. There had been a tropical storm that had hit the Seventh Fleet as it sailed up towards Leyte Gulf, but it didn't impede its movement. But you have 4 combat divisions coming ashore, and somehow the Japanese think that these are just stragglers. Yamashita followed his orders and heavily reinforced his forces on Leyte. Over the next several weeks, the crack 1st Division, probably the best division in the Japanese Army, moved from Manchuria. 2 regiments of the 26th Division, the 68th Independent Mixed Brigade, and elements of the 30th and the 102nd Divisions, which were down on Mindanao, for a total of 38,000 reinforcing troops, all made their way to Leyte. So instead of meeting 22,000 Japanese, 6th Army meets 60,000 Japanese. And Japanese commanders were confident of their chances. On November 2nd, the headquarters of the 35th Army deployed from C2 to Leyte to assume direct control of the battle. After receiving reinforcements along with orders to fight the decisive battle on Leyte, Major General Yoshiharu Tomochika, the Chief of Staff of the 35th Army, recalled, "We had hopeful discussions of entering Tacloban by the 16th of November. We were determined to take offensive after offensive and clean up the American forces on Leyte Island according to original plans. We seriously discussed demanding the surrender of the entire American Army after seizing General MacArthur." The 1st Cavalry Division in the northern portion of the beachhead was a regular Army unit that had been dehorsed. Of course, it didn't bring its horses to the Pacific. And it converted to an infantry division, albeit one with its original Cavalry Division organization. The division experienced combat in the Admiralties before the Leyte campaign, and its combination of regular Army cadre and combat experience probably made it the most tactically competent division in MacArthur's command. It's not a coincidence that the 1st Cavalry Division would lead the way into Tokyo the following year. On the afternoon of October 21st, the 7th Cavalry Regiment liberated Tacloban, the provincial capital of Leyte, to the delight of its citizens who lined the streets and waved American flags as they welcomed their liberators. And this is something I found throughout my research. The Filipinos were genuinely happy to see the Americans return after 3 years of really horrendous Japanese occupation, which killed thousands of Filipinos. Radio reporter William Dunn followed MacArthur for most of his time in the Philippines, and he recalled, I expected a welcome from the Filipino people, but never in my wildest dreams did I expect to witness scenes such as those that greeted the returning Americans. The first American troops to enter the city were greeted with mingled tears and laughter, and with cheers that were almost inarticulate because of the emotion behind them. Of perhaps greater import to the cavalrymen was the seizure of an enormous cache of San Miguel beer, which the division commander, Major General Vernon Mudge, immediately ordered issued to the frontline troops. According to the 1st Cavalry Brigade Commander, Brigadier General William C. Chase, it was warm, but its tactical effect was truly miraculous. MacArthur arrived on the afternoon of October 23rd to restore the Philippine civil government under President Osmeña in a ceremony in front of the provincial capitol building. To the south of the 1st Cavalry Division, the 24th Infantry Division attacked through the high ground to the northern end of Leyte Valley and then towards Carigara Bay on Leyte's northern coast. After overcoming stiff opposition, the 19th Infantry reached the town of Palau late on October 21st and was met by a scene of jubilation. According to the GIs, as the troops entered the town, the Filipinos poured out in a great welcoming crowd. The church bell rang and the people brought gifts of food and a type of Japanese soft drink which they proffered to their liberators. Ragged and dirty as they were, many only recently bereaved through deaths of family members killed during one phase or another of the fighting, the Filipinos were nevertheless almost beside themselves with joy at the return of the Americans. Even the smallest children held up their fingers in the V for victory sign. The 96th Division, nicknamed the Deadeyes, was new to combat. Leyte was actually its first test. The 1,400-foot-high Catmon Hill dominated its beachhead area. On A+1, the 1st Battalion, 383rd Infantry moved towards the southern side of the hill, while the other 2 battalions of the regiment attempted to envelop it. The flanking maneuver was easier said than done, again because of the terrain. There were no roads in the division zone, and vehicles could not traverse the swampy ground behind the beach, so there was very little tank support. It was a hard job for a man to get through with just a rifle. It was a prodigious one for him to carry a machine gun or a mortar on his back, records the division history. At times, the men had to crawl on hands and knees to keep from sinking into the grasping muck. Nevertheless, after 3 days of slogging through swamps and fighting the Japanese, by October 29th, the entire Catmon Hill area was in American hands. The Deadeyes then advanced to the foothills of the mountain range that separates Leyte on its north-south axis, where it hit a Japanese defensive line manned by the remnants of the 16th Division. In the southern portion of the American beachhead, the 7th Infantry Division seized Dulag Airfield on A+1. The hourglass, because of the shape of its patch, its combat patch, was a veteran division, having fought to liberate Attu in the Aleutian Islands in May 1943 and seized Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands in a very successful operation in February 1944. Many of the soldiers were veterans of these campaigns, with the attendant battle scars to prove it. One of the fighting men in these early battles was Private John Schult of Toledo, Ohio, who stated, "We learned the hard way, but it was the quick way, the one lesson way." Now on Leyte, the soldiers were again ready to put their experience to the test. The division advanced to liberate the town of Burauen on October 24th and the 3 airstrips nearby, without which Lieutenant General George Kenney, the commander of the 5th Air Force, assumed that his aircraft would be left stranded back in New Guinea unless they got these airfields. He was wrong, because torrential rains would soon render the airfields inoperable, and his aircraft ended up operating out of Tacloban and Dulag instead. And finally, that wonderful word, right? Last slide. By the end of the Battle of Leyte Gulf on October 26th, the beachhead was secure and 6th Army was advancing toward the mountains that separated the Leyte and Ormoc valleys. The 38,000 Japanese reinforcements brought in by 9 convoys from late October to early December stymied 6th Army's advance in a bid to fight that decisive battle on Leyte. Weather was a crucial factor. Several typhoons hit the island, along with constant rain, and it turned the few poor roads into seas of mud. In some cases, Kruger's troops had to use landing craft to cart supplies over the water to bypass portions of the road on the north coast that had turned into impassable swamps. For 6 weeks, the fighting was a slow, grinding stalemate. But the turning point came on December 7th, yes, the third anniversary after the attack on Pearl Harbor, when the 77th Infantry Division conducted an amphibious turning movement on the west coast of Leyte and then attacked north to seize the port city of Ormoc, thereby stranding the Japanese forces and severing them from their only supply base on the island. MacArthur, in MacArthur style, declared the campaign over on December 26, despite the fact that the 8th Army would spend the next several months killing more than 27,000 Japanese soldiers who remained on the island. Lieutenant General Robert Eckelberger, commander of 8th Army, decries in his memoir that MacArthur would end campaigns to get the PR value out of it, and then the soldiers would be assigned to what he termed mopping up duty. Well, no one wants to die in mopping up duty, but that's what it was termed. And Eckelberger fights the rest of the Japanese army on Leyte and destroys them. In MacArthur's defense, all the major cities had been taken, all the airfields had been taken, and the Japanese were pretty much stranded in the mountains with nothing to eat. The battle for Leyte was indeed decisive, but in favor of the Americans. The rest of the Japanese were killed fighting for their emperor, or they died of starvation in the remote areas once Sixth Army had seized all the ports on the island. For MacArthur and his forces, it was the first objective on his way back to Luzon and the Philippine capital city of Manila. These I took on a tour that I went to the Philippines with the Marine War College, and they went to Bataan and Corregidor, and Gordon Rudd and I went down to Leyte and got to explore around down there. There is actually a MacArthur Wading Ashore Memorial on Leyte, and there is a holiday in Leyte, MacArthur Day, on October 20th. They celebrate it every year. Kids get off school. It's a big deal. So thank you all for your attention and for the opportunity to speak to you today.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. If you have questions, comments, or topic suggestions, the MacArthur Memorial team wants to hear from you. You can reach us at macarthurmemorial@norfolk.gov or find us on X at MacArthur1880 or on Facebook and Instagram as MacArthur Memorial.